Shavua Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Yud Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev Neliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. We know a person incurs liability for the Melachav transferring by removing an item from a private domain and placing it in a public domain, or vice versa, like we spoke about in chapter 1, Mishnah 1. This Mishnah discusses the law in cases where the transfer was not completed in a single course of action, but was interrupted in the middle. So the Mishnah says, Hamotzi ochalin untanan al ha'iskupa. If one took food out of his house, which is a private domain, and placed it in front of his house on a porch, which is a kalmilit, which is neither a private nor a public domain, which the Mefarshim go at length to explain to us the various different domains, and we will try to explain it that way we can understand the Mishnah. A karmelit is an area of certain dimensions that is not a private domain because it does not have valid partitions that are 10 tefachim high, and it's not a public domain because it's not a public thoroughfare, or it's narrower than 16 amot. Now, midoraita, under biblical law, therefore, one is permitted to transfer an object from a reshut yachid, a private domain, or a reshut harabim, a public domain, into a karmelit, and vice versa. The rabbis, however, decreed that one may not move something into or out of a karmelit. Now, the Mishnah uses the term iskupa to refer to a porch between the house and the street that is at least 4 tefachim wide, 4 tefachim long, and between 3 and 9 tefachim high. Now, an area smaller than 4 by 4 tefachim is not even a karmelit. Rather, it's a makom patur, an exempt area. Now, carrying into and out of an exempt area is permitted even according to rabbinic law, even midrabanan. If the porch were lower than 3 tefachim, it would be considered part of the adjacent reshut harabim, and if it were 10 or more tefachim high, it would be a reshut yachid. Now, if it were between 9 and 10 tefachim high, it would also be part of the reshut harabim because the public would use it by momentarily resting their burdens on it in order to reposition them on their backs or shoulders. Basically, different dimensions would equal different categories of places regarding carrying. So again, back to the Mishnah. Hamotzi ochalin untanan ale iskupa. If one took food out of his house and placed it in front of his house on a porch, ben shechazar v'otzian. The halakha is that whether he himself transferred it from the porch to the street, which is a public domain, ben shotzian acher, or whether someone else came and transferred it from the porch to the street, patur, he is exempt from liability, mipnei shelo asa melachto bevat achat, because he did not do his melachav transferring and run in one stage. Rather, he did it in 2 stages. He first took the item from the house to the porch, which he's not liable because the porch is a karmelit, and then he or someone else took it from the porch to the street, for which he is also not liable, which the Mefarshim explained that the Mishnah stated that if he put it down on the porch and then someone else took it from there to the street, he is exempt. The Mefarshim explained this ruling seems unnecessary because the Mishnah already said that he's not liable if he himself took it from there to the street. So obviously he's not liable if another person did it. So the Mefarshim explained, the Mishnah adds this point to teach that doing even half of a transfer is rabbinically forbidden. That's indicated by the Mishnah's use of the word patur, exempt, which implies that he's exempt from biblical liability of bringing a korban, but he has still committed a rabbinic transgression. So he still did a drabanan. Now, in order to be liable for the melachav transferring, one must take an object from a private domain to a public domain, or vice versa, in a single process, without putting it down in a karmelit or any other type of neutral domain on his way. The Mishnah discusses now a similar case. And again, Rabotai, I encourage anybody who needs, if you want to understand the Mishnah better, to look at the elucidated versions of the Mishnayot, to read a clearer or even illustrated versions of the Mishnayot that bring down pictures in order to help a person visualize the case of the Mishnah. But let us continue. If one took a basket filled with produce from his house and placed it in front of the house or on an outer porch, which has the status of a public domain, which Mefarshim explain that this outer porch is in contrast to the porch that we just mentioned, because it's a porch. This outer porch is a porch or step next to the street that is less than 3 tefachim high. So because it's so low, it's considered part of the adjacent reshut harabim. So again, If one took a basket filled with produce from his house and placed it in front of the house on an outer porch, which has the status of a public domain, but he positioned the basket in such a way that part of it is still in his house and part of it's on the outer porch, the halacha is that even if most of the produce in the basket is outside in the public domain, Paturi is exempt because he did not take the entire basket outside. He is not liable unless he takes the entire basket outside to the public domain without leaving part of it inside. And Mishna explained that the Mishnah is referring to a basket that contains long gourds that are almost as long as the basket itself. Therefore, when the person placed part of the basket on the porch and part in the house, each gourd was likewise partly on the porch and partly in the house. Since he did not transfer a single gourd in its entirety to the Reshut HaRabim, is exempt. However, if the basket contained mustard seeds or other small items, the seeds in the section of the basket that was taken out of the house would be entirely in the Reshut HaRabim, and the person would be liable for having completely transferred those seeds. The Mishnah was referring to a very specific case where the items in the basket didn't fully make it to the other side. Now, the point from this Mishnah from this last case, is that in order to be liable, he must transfer at least one entire gourd to the outer porch. That's what it means, ad shotziet kol hakupa, unless he takes out the entire basket, meaning it has to be at least one entire gourd that goes to the outer porch, that's taken out to the outer porch. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now teaches that a person is liable for transferring an object only if he carries it in a normal way, which is a general rule, that one who performs the melacha in an unusual manner, he's not biblically liable. He doesn't have to make a midoraita, although such acts are often forbidden by rabbinic decree midrabanan. The Mishnah begins, Hamotzi ben bimino ben bismolo. If one transfers something either in his right hand or in his left hand, betocheko, in the garment that is next to his chest, meaning Mefarshim explained the garment was made in such a way that it could hold things between it and the person's chest, or al kitefo, on his shoulder, hayab. In any of these cases, he is liable because he carried it in a normal manner. Sheken masa b'nekad, because it's clear from the Torah that even carrying on one's shoulders is normal, because that's how the load of the Mishkan's vessels was carried by the sons of Kehat. Like the Pasuk says, they carried on their shoulders. In Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 7, Mishnah 9. And the Mefarshim explain the sons of Kehat, which were one of the three families of Levi, they carried the ark, the menorah, the inner altar and outer altar on their shoulders when the Mishkan was transported in the wilderness. So it shows that bearing a load on the shoulder is a normal way of carrying. Now, carrying in one's right or left hand or in a garment next to one's chest is certainly normal. The Mishnah cites a proof only as regards to carrying on the shoulders, because it's not as common as the other methods of carrying, and one might have thought that it's considered unusual. So carrying in either your right hand, left hand, or in the garment that's next to your chest, that's a normal way. The Mishnah brought a proof for the shoulder in case a person might have said that's considered unusual. Kilachal yado, however, one who transfers something in an unusual manner, literally back of the hand. So, for example, beraglo, bepiv, uvmapako, beozno, v'saro, with his foot, in his mouth, in the crook of his elbow, in his ear, in his hair, which Mefarshim explain. When we say in his mouth, it's referring to items that are not food, because carrying food in one's mouth is normal, and one would be liable for doing so, as Tosfot says in Masechet Shabbat, page 92a. But to continue with the Mishnah, upundato upia lemata, and his money belt with its opening facing down, which the Mefarshim explain, he stored coins in a money belt and tied its opening shut, but he wore the belt in such a way that the opening faced downwards. Now that's an unusual way to carry coins, because the ties might become undone and the coins will fall out. If the opening were facing upward, he would be liable, because that's a normal way of carrying coins. Ben pundato lechaluko, between his money belt and his cloak, which the Mefarshim explained, he took the object between his money belt and his garment. Now carrying an object in this way is unusual because it's not secured there. Ubisvat chaluko, in the hem at the bottom of his cloak. Bimin alo, besandalo, in his shoe or in his sandal, patur. In all of these cases, he is exempt. Shelo otzi kidech hamotzin, because he did not transfer the item in the normal manner of those who transfer items. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen v'amen.